In Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, everything you do feels like a puzzle, and those puzzles never fail to be all at once challenging, rewarding, and downright fun. The game is a densely packed theme park of exploration and adventure, and it succeeds at almost everything it does, I think, by evolving the mystery at the center of its story outward and into every facet of the world and the gameplay. With Machine Games' pedigree for delivering outrageous action and ultra-violence, it would have been easy for them to make an Indiana Jones game focused on first-person shooter mechanics and linear levels. And while a straightforward indie story with Wolfenstein-style action would have made for a great game, what the studio delivered instead is a vastly more interesting beast, with a uniquely structured approach to exploration and combat that forces the player to evolve their tactics mid-encounter. The game expands out the most memorable and distinctive aspects of the Indiana Jones films into a consistently remarkable interactive adventure. In total, the Great Circle feels like one giant mind-boggling maze with the player trying to make their way to the center. But rather than relying just on pulling levers and pondering riddles, it also asks the player to solve puzzles through combat, traversal, and exploration.
Let us hurry. There is nothing to fear here.
That's what scares me.
At the center of the Great Circle's great story is the mystery of the Great Circle itself. Composed of a series of holy sites aligned around the circumference of the globe and each hiding a carved lump of rock with some kind of unimaginable power, this Great Circle will require a lot of travel and a lot of riddles to ultimately solve. As Indy makes his way around the globe, the story's progress is repeatedly gated by a series of ever-evolving and consistently engaging puzzles. All of these ancient sites feature some combination of winding tunnels and brain teasers, but they genuinely never felt repetitive or boring to me. Specific locations will reutilize key mechanics like moving mirrors or weight-sensitive pedestals, but they never seem overused because they're always implemented in new ways. Some of the puzzles are arguably a bit too easy, and a few are actually quite tricky to get your head around. But the vast majority feel finely tuned to offer the exact right amount of challenge to the player. And the game includes all the right mechanics to make every tomb and secret passage feel unique. You can find keys, artifacts, and statuettes, some of which require lugging around and some of which will fit inside Indy's bag. Then you can use these items to interact with doors and slots in wrong ways and right ways to hopefully eventually uncover new secrets. And after unlocking new tools throughout the game, you will have new ways to approach these puzzle areas. The levers and switches in the game are always clunky and tactile, and rarely provide an obvious solution, ensuring that the experience of opening another passageway is consistently satisfying. Every new puzzle room that the player enters is a guaranteed challenge with an eventual rewarding moment of discovery. Because even though the answers aren't usually immediately obvious, it always ultimately feels intuitive. And the first person perspective was definitely the right choice for this kind of gameplay too, because it goes a long way to putting the player in Indy's shoes and inviting that interaction with the world. Admittedly, there are occasionally some awkward shifts between first and third person in areas where you're repeatedly going between swinging and ledges and normal walking, but I do think that the combination still works by allowing some more classic third person traversal in combination with the immersive puzzling. Outside of the game's main story puzzles, the world is full of additional, sometimes small and sometimes quite large and impressive mysteries, all of which feel at home in the story but also offer their own little self-contained adventures. The Great Circle constantly begs the player to explore and interact with its world to find new things, and it's always a joy to do so. But while these brain-teasing moments feel like they're at the center of the game's design, they're not the only puzzling element of the Great Circle's bigger mystery.
Oh, I'm coming for you, God. Mommy,
Hold still.
One of the greatest strengths of the original Indiana Jones films is the way that fight scenes are composed to evolve through a series of comedic and action-packed moments. And the Great Circle has done a remarkable job of translating this strength into its gameplay, by allowing the player to literally puzzle their way through combat sequences. It would have been easy to let the player load up on ammo and blast through every encounter, but instead the approach to such fights is uniquely brilliant, as it allows every combat scenario to intensify with action-packed beats that resolve each skirmish just like in the films. For a start, Indiana Jones and the Great Circle makes it very fun to almost never fire your sidearm. Indy does, of course, carry his trusty revolver for most of the game, but going into battle with this weapon drawn is almost always a bad idea, and frankly, it's a tonally inappropriate one too, chiefly because Dr. Jones's aim is usually not to kill as many fascists as possible. It's to get past them alive so that he can get to the treasure first. Running into battle can work if you're adept at dodging and defending in a brawl, but most of the time when the player approaches a group of armed soldiers, they will likely opt either to find a path around while avoiding as much conflict as possible, or to weave their way through an encampment strategically utilizing kitchen utensils, brooms, and sledgehammers to take out bad guys in the funniest or most stylish ways possible. And then, when things go wrong, you can swiftly adapt by picking up a rifle or throwing a punch. Encounters will often require you to strategically cycle through every combat mechanic in the game to reach your end goal. And by doing so, you can assemble a sequence of action beats which result in a significantly more entertaining experience than the majority of first-person shooters. You might find a frying pan, knock out a guard, get spotted, use your whip to knock their weapon out of their hands and punch their lights out. Or you could throw a spade at someone's head before shoving them off a ledge and grabbing their gun before it falls off with them. None of these elements feel especially spectacular on their own, but they consistently come together in a symphony of comedic violence in the game, empowering the player to dynamically conduct this orchestra in any way they want to find a solution that will allow Indy to survive the encounter. It's an ever-evolving combat puzzle and it feels great. There were several times while playing the Great Circle that I actually forgot that I even had a gun, because I was so focused on finding shovels and plungers instead. But that did mean that when I found myself suddenly in a bind, whipping out Indy's pistol as a suddenly remembered last resort concluded a fight spectacularly. I think it's intuitively obvious when playing that Indy's weapon is only there as a just in case, but if you're really not up to sneaking around or brawling, then it can provide some hilarious anticlimactic moments in classic Indy style. Compared with the outrageously gory action of the Wolfenstein games, Indiana Jones's fascist killing is obviously a bit more tame, but it is equally fun in its own unique way that is a lot more in line with the character and his PG-13 films. It's actually kind of nice to play a game where you're not a mass murderer, but the action is still fantastic and often challenging, in a way that is appropriately representative of how it probably should feel being a lone archaeologist going up against a small army. Enemy encampments throughout the game pose enough of a threat to the player that choosing to sneak around is often a better choice than fighting your way through. But, of course, it can be difficult to just walk on by in a world full of secrets and treasures. While the Great Circle offers many smaller, more linear levels throughout its story, the gameplay really shines in its more open hub areas. Honestly, much to my surprise. I had not expected a lot from the side activities and open areas in the Great Circle, but the way they are integrated into the game actually complements the central story perfectly. I had worried that spending too much time exploring the map and seeking out extracurricular treasure would make the pacing of the game feel off. But I genuinely think that expanding the time spent in each location enhances the adventure by rooting you more firmly in this world. Indy might usually traverse the globe and finish each adventure in around 2 hours, but spending 3 times as long just exploring the Vatican feels like experiencing the unedited version of an Indiana Jones story, in a good way. It's like being there for every thrilling moment and the downtime in between. Each of the game's main hubs are basically the perfect size. They're big enough to feel endlessly explorable, but small enough that the player doesn't spend excessive amounts of time running from point A to point B. Instead of filling out the world with repetitive open-world missions, the Great Circle features select fieldwork quests which are more like mini-adventures with their own mysteries to solve, alongside a variety of scattered collectible artifacts which were, to me, significantly more fun to collect than most collectibles, because they aligned with the game's systems and story and Indy's motivations. Honestly, as someone who isn't usually an achievement hunter and rarely aims to find every possible collectible, I don't think I've ever played a game which has made me quite so excited about searching every nook and cranny for every single treasure. And it helps that easily unlockable maps make the whole process a lot less tedious, allowing you to focus on the traversal and puzzles required to find dozens of interesting antiques, which clearly belong in a museum. Navigating these open maps often requires some thoughtful planning and risk assessment because, again, each encounter feels like a puzzle in and of itself with a player-designed solution. And even when you're not exploring the outer edges of a map, the game's level design gives a more open feel to every ancient cavern and hidden passageway. One of the biggest issues with many of the brilliant indie-inspired adventure games like Uncharted and Tomb Raider is the occasional feeling that you're climbing a wall or shimmying along a ledge again and again over a short period of time and always along the same linear path. When the route is so linear that you figure you might as well be watching a climbing cutscene, you know that something has gone wrong. But the Great Circle gets around this problem for the most part because the levels are either designed to allow many varied routes and solutions, or when there's only one way to reach some treasure, the game makes it just tricky enough to find that path that the player feels more engaged with the process. The relative lack of yellow paint, as it were, to guide Indy along his path makes puzzling your way through a level a lot more challenging and fun.
Oh, you gotta be kidding me.
Indiana Jones and the Great Circle is a genuinely brilliant, uniquely composed indie adventure, which faithfully uses all the key ingredients from the original films while building every aspect of the game not around combat or open world activities, but around its puzzles. The game's core mechanics invite the player to interact with the world in countless different ways, and doing so never grows tiresome. Everything emerges outward from the story's central mystery, and it feels like anything you do or find in the game is a part of that larger puzzle. If you've had a chance to play the game, then how do you feel about the Great Circle and its great puzzles? Let me know in the comments, and please do like and subscribe if you'd like to hear me talk more games. Otherwise, I'll see you next time around.